Hello and welcome to part 3 in our series of exploring ego states. I'm Chris.
And I'm Nathan.
I love doing that bit because he always gets caught slightly unawares when I do that.
I always know it's coming as well. It's weird.
Today we're going to be exploring the child ego state. So a quick recap, The last 2 weeks we've looked at the parent ego state, we've looked at the adult ego state, today being the child. These all form 3 stages of what's known as the parent-adult-child model, funnily enough, in terms of therapy. Sits in a bigger context that's known as transactional analysis, more of which we will unpack in future videos. But today, we're going to be looking ever so briefly today, we promise, Scout's Honour, into the child ego state. Mr. Fox, over to you.
Yes. Okay, cool. So what is the child ego state? It's a good question. So the child ego state is a set of, I suppose you can think of it as like a set of recordings in the brain of us as children. So things that happened to us, the way we reacted, our kind of thoughts, feelings, behaviors, all that sort of stuff. And so it kind of gets all recorded in our brain. And when we kind of go into our child ego state, we will act, behave, think, feel as if we were a child. Me as a child.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't become a child. I just add all of that old feelings, those old emotions, all that old behaviors. They just come back and boom. And we all kind of, so we kind of all have that saying of being, oh, stop being so childish, or you're acting like a child. That's the child coming out. That's what it is. And that's a very parent way of phrasing that, by the way. But it's, and we can all notice it. So often you can see it when someone gets excited. They'll start like bouncing around, or when someone gets into a strop, like a stroppy teenager comes out, or if we're frightened, sometimes we might go into those kind of like childlike behaviors, or if we're angry, we can get into that. But anger is one of those ones that kind of covers lots of different states. But sorry,
I think
Chris,
no, you're fine. You're fine. I was thinking about some of the stuff we spoke about last week when we did the "what time is it" interaction. Sometimes we can be maneuvered into child mode by the responses of others. And like we said last week, the big component of working with people in therapy will often be, well, how old did you feel? How old do you feel in particular moments? And I think if we all pause and reflect, there are times in our interactions with other people, or even in our interactions with ourselves and our thought process, that we don't feel the age that we are. So in those moments when we start to feel younger than we are, significantly younger than we are, then welcome to child mode, folks. That's kind of where we are in those moments. Now, child mode in the main, and we'll keep it relatively simple because we don't want to go into too much detail. There are 2 halves to the child ego state. There would be what's called the free child and the adapted child. Now, Nathan, are you all right to kind of like sort of talk a little bit about free child? How would you define free child?
Oh, that's a good one.
It is a good question, isn't it?
It is a very good question. So the free child is, so the way that I tend to describe it is being me, I suppose, as a child, like without rules, without regulations.
Yeah.
Kind of enjoying the moment, being kind of like fully me. The way that I sometimes describe to people is, if you see, if you're ever in a school playground, seeing kids just running around, just having fun, being in the moment, right here, right now, that's free child. That there, and it's that kind of just like. Sometimes language fails with the free child because it's an experiential thing you kind of experience.
That's really key. Yeah, and I love your example talking about the kids running around the playground, and I love how our examples are quite close that we use in our sessions with clients. So one way that I talk about free child experiences from my own childhood, I remember my school that I went to had what we used to call a windy bank. And you could stand at the top of the windy bank with your Parker jacket on, welcome to the mid-'80s, children, and then flick it over your head to kind of make like a sail behind your head, and the wind would catch you and pull you down the bank. And it's kind of that free, no consequences behavior. You talked about no rules, and sort of like no sort of real construct around it. And it's not in that sort of rebellious way. It's just literally the free, caught up in the moment, extremely present, but not present in an adult sense, which is perhaps broad and aware of consequences. Present in a child sense is kind of very narrow. You know, I am here, there is a bouncy castle, I'm going to bounce. It doesn't matter if I step over people to get to the bouncy castle. That's an unintended consequence of it.
Yes, yeah, it's kind of like, say that I'm acting as I want to.
Yes,
which is not necessarily it's not that kind of I'm doing things and sod everybody else. It's not that. It's just right here in this moment. This is what I want to do, and I'm fully in it.
Yeah, and the adapted child, which is the other half of the child ego state, there are subsections of all these, but we're not going to go into them. The adapted child is kind of the same outward demonstrated behavior, sort of, but the intention, the motivation behind it is different. So let me give a common adapted child scenario, which would be a demonstration of adapted child behavior. Parents walking around a supermarket with their child who asks for some sweets, and the parents say, no, you can't have sweets. So the child kicks off massively, causes a scene, in the hope that, and this is the thing, they're demonstrating this outward behavior as in, I'm having this tantrum, because the parent's first way to kind of think about keeping the child quiet is to, all right, whatever, and putting the Haribo in the trolley. Child's got what they wanted in that sense. So there's an element of, dare I say it, manipulation, but there's certainly an element of conscious display of outward behavior to get something else, to achieve something else. An adapted child behavior, unfortunately, doesn't end for us when we're sort of like 12 or 13. Adapted child behavior carries on throughout life, and we will often display levels of adapted child behavior to get something that we feel we want or we need, to the detriment of somebody else or the environment around us.
I suppose as well, taking that example, you said of a child who learned that if I throw a tantrum, I get what I want. Take that into adulthood, and as an adult, that person is now going, "Oh, what do you mean I don't get that promotion?" So, the way my brain has learned to deal with something I throw a tantrum, so I'll scream and shout and cause a fuss and all this sort of stuff until you cave in, because that's what I've learned to do. And the likelihood is that being in that I'm slipping into transactions here, but we'll just briefly touch on it. That child state inside of that person will impact the parent state inside of the other person, and there'll be a reaction, whatever that may be.
Absolutely.
Equally, the adapted child state can be things like that are detrimental to us, so myself. So if I've learned, let's take that same example, and that child has a tantrum and the parent completely ignores them, shuts down, goes, no, I'm never giving in to you. Then that child may learn, well, there's no point. There's no point in me doing anything because I never get it. So I will take that disappointment and internalize it and hold on to it.
Yeah. So working in therapy with people who have been victims of neglect or abuse, you will often see a strong prevalence of adapted child in their behaviors, because they're doing exactly as Nathan's talking. When I cried, no one came. So it all just goes inside, and this seething mass of stuff sits inside them, bubbling and burning away. But outwardly, you don't see anything. That's also adapted child behavior.
And the interesting thing about adapted child behavior is that it can be changed, because it's an adaptation of my nature. So I can adapt it again to be something I want to do. And often with adapted child stuff, we can learn adaptations from as early as birth all the way up to, well, whatever age. And so we can carry adaptations with us that I learned when I was 2, 3, even younger, that I'm still doing now. And a lot of these things are super unconscious, so we don't know they're happening. They sit like with all this stuff just below. So there's lots of behaviors where we might go, why do I always do that? Every time that person comes into the room, or every time my boss says something, I feel like I can't do anything, or I have this I can't speak thing, or why is it I always have to be the biggest, loudest person in the room, even though I don't really want to be? All those questions that you can boil them, not all of them, but some of them you can boil down to being, okay, that's adapted child coming out and giving me a set of rules of things I have to follow.
We're all aware, actually, of adapted child. We're all understanding of phrases like self-soothing. Nathan talked about the bit about quiet and internalizing, but we'll notice it in therapy. We'll see people go into child mode when perhaps they start doing this on their arm as they're talking, or maybe they're playing with their hair, or whatever it might be. Those moments, that's the sense of adapted child, because we're seeking to kind of reassure ourselves in those moments that we're feeling uncomfortable.
Yeah,
and that's our coping strategy in that space. That's adaptation.
Yeah. So I suppose it's worth talking briefly, because we're keeping this short, of how we might start to notice the child when the child comes out. And again, it goes back to things like the language you're using, body language, like Chris said, body language, of that, those self-soothing, those childlike behaviors that we might do. The words that we use are also really important. Anything that we do where, I suppose, again, like I was saying earlier, those why do I always do that? And how do I feel when I do that? Well, it always makes me feel like, I always feel like I'm a helpless child. Okay, cool. That's what's going on. And kind of, so looking at those sorts of things, those sorts of clues can give us an idea as to what's going on in that moment.
And they're more frequent than we realize they are, because they're super unconscious.
Yeah.
So we're not even necessarily aware. They do work. That's it. Because the moment we start bringing these things out, other people respond to them. That's why we bring them out, because it's adapted and other people respond. So we keep on doing it. And there's a phrase that we use in therapy, and it's something I kind of often talk to our clients about. It's printed on the wall in our other therapy room, and it's from Carl Jung, and it says, "Until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives, and we will call it fate." Whether you believe in fate is kind of like neither here nor there, but we all do this stuff that we don't realize we're doing it, and we do it for a purpose because it gets us results. And the way the human psyche works, if it didn't work for us, we wouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, 100%. So I had a thought in my head and it's just disappeared, which is really annoying, but it's obviously not important. So carry on, Chris.
But free child always kind of like, it feels like this place of unbridled joy, and I suppose in a sense it kind of is, but we can experience free child in sadness as well. So it's not just about being happy and wonderful and blue sky, bunnies dancing around in and out of hedgerows and all that sort of stuff. It covers a spectrum of emotions. So you've got free child, which is authentic, really, really authentic, uninhibited you in that space. Whether it's joyous, whether it's sad, whether it's anger, free child can demonstrate through all of those. The confusing element is so can adapted child. So free child or adapted child could be at play. And it takes a little bit of, dare I say it's skill, but I probably mean self-awareness to notice which of the two you're demonstrating at that point. So we tend to display adapted child when we feel that control is ebbing away from us, when we feel we need to regain that control, when we feel hurt, abused, or threatened. That will be when adapted child will come out. Now, threatened covers a wide spectrum of literally, being forced into a corner, or our sense of safety, our sense of monetary security, especially at the moment. So we might find that with all the lockdown shenanigans going on and all this uncertainty we're experiencing, our adapted child comes out to play more now than it would do. Notice how we're commenting on social media, for example. Well, does that come from an adult place? Is that our adapted child speaking, venting, trying to regain a sense of control?
It is interesting, because once you're aware of these three ego states, and you get used to spotting them in yourself and understanding how our own ego states work, you start to see them in other people. And then you start to be like, oh, that person's in their child, and so is that person. And that the child is a really common ego state. It's a really big, because it's one of the first ones we get to know really well. I mean, we're kind of, depending on which, let's not get into the theory right now because it's complicated. But it's the one we spend a lot of time in. And there is an argument to say that men have a bigger child ego state than women, but that's broad brushstrokes, and we don't tend to do that too much. But it's not that I'm saying that men can be childish, but we can.
I know what you mean.
I know what you mean. Give us 5 minutes alone with something, and it's just like, oh, it becomes like a drill, becomes a gun, and all that sort of stuff. Not that I've ever done that.
No.
But yeah, but it's kind of like, especially I suppose with social media and stuff, kind of see so many people having these like, you can read a comment and go, that's child ego state, that's a parent. Not many adults about, and because it pushes us into these triggering times, and then it kind of pushes us into these not extremes, but pushes it away from that kind of central adult place into this reaction, into this kind of being scripty. I'm trying to avoid that word because we haven't talked about scripts, but we will talk about scripts.
We will. We'll come back and do another mini series at some point that goes into scripts, because it flows so nicely into this. And we talked, I think, in the first session on parent, we talked about shoulds and oughts, and the shoulds and oughts kind of come into the. But in the child ego state, shoulds and oughts kind of are transmitted to needs and wants. Yeah. So what do we need versus what do we want? Well, there's a change there between adapted child and free child playing in that moment. So I think, when we look at the 3 ego states in general, how do I know which ego state I'm in at any given moment in time? Really, really high level, kind of basic, silly sentences to describe it. Well, a parent ego state, if we're in that metaphorical space of hand on a hip and finger wagging and telling someone something, welcome to parent ego state. That's kind of where you are. If we feel a need to hug someone, to protect someone, we're perhaps putting them in child ego state, or maybe they're doing it to themselves, and we're becoming the nurturing parent around them. In terms of adult ego state, well, if I've walked away from a conversation and it's left no residue with me of, can't believe that person said that, I can't believe that they were being that way, or I'm really hurt and offended by what that person did, or I'm in such a mood with them, I can't believe it. Then if none of those things exist, then you've had an adult ego state conversation with somebody where you met, you discussed what you needed to discuss, and you came away, and wasn't that lovely? Adult ego state in a basic sense. And the child ego state is, if you're feeling younger than you actually are, then you are in child ego state. It's kind of indisputable at that point that in some way you've been triggered for whatever reason, whether you're in free or adapted child, where you're going to notice by the things that you say and the emotions that you experience in that moment. Yeah, I think that kind of covers off. That's my basic summary of the 3 ego states.
Yeah, the thing to remember with anything revolving parent, adult, child, is it's complicated. It's really complicated. This is the top level. It gets much more complicated. You drill down into it. We're not going to go down that far, because it's too difficult to do on a video. But remember, it's complicated. So if you come away watching these videos and you try and apply this stuff and you're like, I can't remember how does the child work again? Or what are the points of the child? Stick with the parent, adult, and child, and just stick with those 3 and go, okay, I think that's my parent because I'm feeling this way. And I think that's my child that way. My adult's like this. And I think that's one thing that I kind of tend to do with people is to go, okay, what's your child like? What's your parent like? What's your adult like? And there goes my dog. Start on that kind of surface level and learn things, and then kind of learn the details.
Yeah, it's good to bring the ego state into the room to kind of own it for that moment. Come in. I always think of like a little bit like blind date with contestant number 1, number 2, and number 3 behind the screen. It can feel a little bit like that sometimes, because our ego states, until we see them, they're invisible. They're behind a screen to us, and there's something about revealing the screen and you're going home with Brian, an accountant from such and such. Sorry if you're Brian, an accountant, but it's that kind of thing, right?
Yes. So I'm muting myself.
Thank you.
I'm muting myself while the dog's barking, so it doesn't ruin the recording. He stopped. Okay.
He's in child mode because the postman's outside.
He is in total child mode. But yes, absolutely. I think we're done, aren't we? Feels like.
I think we've timed it quite well now that the postman's outside.
Very, very well.
Okay, so if this video or any of our other videos has been of interest to you and you'd like to explore an element of what therapy could mean for you, by all means do contact us. Our website address is, don't worry Nathan, it won't come to you because the dog's in the background, www.cornerstonesw.co.uk. You can email us either our names, Nathan @ or Chris @ the same address, or the global email address for us is contact@cornerstonesw.co.uk. We're on Facebook, Twitter, other social media paraphernalia. You'll find it. Instagram, that's the one. We're on there as well. So by all means, do make contact. We'd be happy to sit down with you and have a chat, say how therapy could work for you. But I hope you find these videos useful. If you do, we'd love to hear your comments or your questions below. By all means, feel free to put some stuff down. Maybe even requests for what you'd like to see in videos, and then we can respond accordingly at some point in the next 18 months or so, no doubt.
Probably, most likely.
So I'm really in my head trying to avoid doing like a two Ronnies, goodbye from him and goodbye from me type thing here. But thank you for watching. I hope this has all been of use to you, and no doubt we will see you again soon.
Goodbye.